Hello, Kevin. How are you?
I'm doing well, Vin. How are you?
I'm doing quite okay, thank you. I wanted to talk to you about an article that I just published in a new libertarian website called liberties.net. It's a website that has as a focus Europe, because a lot of libertarian websites are focusing on the United States or the world. Here's really a libertarian website that tries to look at the problems of Europe from a libertarian lens. So it's published in English, French, and German. This article now is in English, but it's going to come out in a couple of days in French as well. And as you can see from the title, it's called The Declaration of 1789 Does Not Protect Rights. Now, I think this is important also for libertarians because a lot of libertarians, they believe that documents, the legal documents, can protect them, can protect people from the state, can protect their rights, right? When you talk about rights, I think it's important to first to make the distinction, which maybe not everybody is familiar with. So I just want to make this distinction between negative rights, right, which is the freedom from, right, freedom from being abused by the state or freedom from being coerced by the state, right? This is basically the right to private property, essentially. And then you have positive rights, which is basically the freedom to, right? Freedom to have schooling, freedom to have all the opportunities that you can get when the state basically gets involved in society in all kinds of different ways. And of course, the leftist or statist or socialist way of looking at society and at looking at rights is really a lot focused on positive rights. Now, we are looking here at negative rights. And why is the document of 1789 so cherished also by libertarians? Is because at first glance, you get the impression that it protects negative rights, that it protects basically citizens from the arbitrary power of the state to coerce the citizen, right? So it protects private property, and then private property, this can be declined into different, more detailed granular rights, such as the right of free expression and so on. So what I wanted to do is just go through first the first part, and then I'll just check for your comments. The first part is basically to explain that it's basically to review first the different is basically to review the different aspects concerning negative rights. And here we can take a look at that in the following way. Um, if we look at this now, we can see that, sorry about that. Um, I really tried to split this article up into two parts. One part I call the bright side, the way freedom and property rights are actually protected or seemingly protected by this document. And this is the part that everybody is constantly quoting, right? There's been a case in France just recently about a woman called Ksenia Fyodorova. She is not wanted in France by the government because of her opinions. So everybody's screaming, this is a breach of the Declaration of Human Rights and of the Citizen of 1789. And I recall that this document from 1789, which was created during the summer of 1789, this famous summer of revolution, it's actually a part constitutionally of the French Constitution of 1958, basically the current French Constitution. That's why it's important. It's not just a document that is a historical of historical interest. It's actually a document that is highly relevant today, not only in France, of course, constitutionally, but also in a lot of other countries. But basically, you can see here that Article 4 states that liberty consists in being able to do anything that does not harm others. Sounds great, right? Article 17, the right of property is inviolable and sacred, and it's not a privilege for some, contrary to the Ancien Régime, right? It says in Article 11 that free communication of ideas and of opinions is one of the most precious rights of man. Sounds amazing, right? Uh, Also, Article 6 states that all men are equal before the law and that everyone has the right of resistance to oppression to the state. This is a very important idea. And this links to the idea of consensual taxation, right? That you can only be taxed if you approve of this taxation, if it's a consensual taxation, right? As opposed to the confiscatory taxation that exists today. So Article 14, I think it's very important because it's never mentioned, and there's a reason why it's never mentioned. But basically, it says all citizens have the right to ascertain, either personally or through their representatives, the necessity of the public contribution, basically tax, right? To consent to it freely, to monitor its use, and to determine its amount, its basis of assessment, its collection, and its duration. And of course, this is key, right? You can see that in France and in no other country is this article actually upheld, even though, as I said, the 1789 Declaration is part of the French Constitution today. So nobody likes to recall this article. That's why I'm recalling it in this article. So my more general point here is to explain that you can never rely on documents in order to get the protection that you want or that you feel that you want from the state. This is a big mistake. So a lot of libertarians make this mistake, and I want to just clarify that this is not possible. And we can see it very clearly also with the US Constitution, the amendment to the Bill of Rights, amendment to the Constitution, which is basically the Bill of Rights, including the Declaration of Independence, which has certain points in common with this document from France. And you can see it also in the United States that the US Constitution is constantly violated. It has been violated even since before the Civil War, but in particular since the Civil War. And nevertheless, everybody speaks about the Constitution as being a sacred document and so on. It's all just a lie. And before I go into the detail and look at the dark side, maybe you want to jump in.
Sure. I would definitely like to put this document in a historical context. Um, this came right after the French Revolution, which was basically the bourgeoisie, the capitalist mode of production, taking power from the aristocracy, from the nobility and the clergy. So we had a switch from the feudal mode of production to the capitalist mode of production. And so you have a new regime, the new boss, basically, who's writing a bit of a love letter to their subjects, basically, because you have to see this document expresses the desires and wishes of the ruling class, the new ruling class, the bourgeoisie. And so what they're doing is setting out the system so that they benefit from it, and that the other people, the subjects of it, will just have to live with it, basically. So always, when you talk about freedom, or liberty, there's always the other side, which is authority, power, and order. The two are in dialectical tension with each other and must be together, like day and night. You can't just have day;
Of course,
night always
of
follows.
course.
It's like
That's why you never
basically like
have a fully liberty. You never
yes,
have
this is
fully liberty. You
exactly. And
basically
so
are constantly fighting for liberty. And what I often write in my articles is that this fight never ends, right? You can never reach a state where finally you say, now we are free. And this has been the mistake in a lot of parts of Europe in the last decades. People have thought, now we have democracy, we don't need to do anything about it. Now we have freedom. we don't need to do anything about it. It's like the end of history, right? We have reached this stage, we can never go back. But this is a huge mistake, right? So I'm
Let
fully
me.
aligned with you from this point of view.
Okay, so let's continue though. So this document is basically, it implies a state, a ruling class giving power to other people. So you have ruler and subject. So you have the few giving promises, or, basically it's like they're describing the iceberg, say, is the liberty part, and underneath is all the power and coercion and
Yeah,
whatever. But we're
exactly.
not, and we're still not anywhere near a democracy, because, and today, because what a proper democracy, the rights would be given by the citizens to themselves, if we can conceive of that. It's hard to even think of that. But that's what would be like real democracy, where we don't have something above giving rights. We would be giving the rights to each other, however that would work. I'm not. Another thing is that you often concentrate on the state as if property, like the people attacking property would be the state, but that's not at all usually the case. Yeah, especially if property is very concentrated, the state has to protect that property from the mob, from the poor, from the grabbing people who want something, who are starving, say. I'm exaggerating a little bit. You see that they have to have a state apparatus to protect the property owners from the mob. And the smaller the property owner class gets, the more powerful the state must be in order to create some sort of equilibrium to keep the mob, or the poor people, whatever, from grabbing that property. So obviously, I'm not against the mob, but I'm just saying how I'm using like exaggerated language to
Yeah,
get the
but,
point
but
across.
you're right. This is true. Let's get back to the document though. But you're right. This opens up another section, another video that we should do. I actually have an article out now with the Mises Institute, which discusses exactly this point. Just to make it very clear, there are two violations of property rights or negative rights. One is the illegal violation of property rights. This is what you're talking about now. It is the when citizens commit crimes, property crimes on other citizens, right? That's the illegal part. And that's what you're talking about when you talk about mob, right? What I'm talking about here, why is the state so important? Why we need to focus on the state? It is because the state is responsible for legal violation of property rights. And this is what Bastiat called the legal spoliation, right? And this is the part which people don't get. Because
Yeah,
people understand very clearly that theft is wrong, burglary, assault, even financial crimes, even though they don't understand the detail of this crime, they understand that it's a crime. But people don't understand, because they don't want to recognize it, they cannot recognize it, is that the state is constantly violating property rights legally. And this is
I,
taxation, as
I,
I just said, because it's not consensual. And it is also inflation, having a fiat currency, for example. That's also a violation of property. But why do I focus on that? I focus on
I
that
think
because it is the state that is committing the legal crime, right?
I
That's the
think what
reason.
happens when you concentrate on that, you're dividing the wealthy elite property owners from the state. You're making what I would call, okay, their Venn diagrams aren't exactly the same, but they're highly overlapping. The state is wealthy property owners. The two
Uh,
are basically the same thing. There's some
did,
slight differences, but so with taxation or inflation, sometimes they have to like pay off the mob, say, to keep them from attacking the wealthy, to give them some welfare, to give them bread and circuses, to calm them down, to accept the current order. So there's a lot of that going on as well.
Yeah, you have a point there. I think it's important to mention that. However, in many cases, well, property existed long before the state. So the state, the modern state I'm talking about, is something that has come on top of that. And of
When
course,
did
in the beginning, you didn't have you had a lot of property, but you didn't have a modern state. But I want to just go back to the article because this is an interesting discussion that I would like to have when we go through another article. But I really want to focus on the document itself. And if you go to the next part of the document, we look at the dark side. We see here this legal positivism and the state power, exactly what you mentioned, right? I wouldn't call it exactly, let's say, the bourgeoisie or the ruling class. Yes, you're right, but it's not mentioned as obviously as that. And this is there's a reason for that, right? They use the very impersonal name of the law, right,
of
or public
course.
order. So this is similar to what you're saying, but I think it's an important distinction because you don't want to explain who is behind basically the state, right?
It's objective, it's universal, it's the hidden agent. But
Exactly.
obviously, it's the power elite. I mean, we're not dumb. We know who's writing this. We know who's enforcing it.
Exactly. So basically, you have here the uh, the Article 17 that I mentioned previously. It is it states that basically nobody can be deprived of property. So it basically protects private property, but unless public necessity legally ascertained, obviously requires it. So here it gives a caveat, right? A very
Eminent
important caveat.
domain in America is called eminent domain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
eminent domain. Here is more general. It's a public necessity. It's the language of the 18th century. But this is something that exists in all Western countries and all, even other countries which are not Western that have constitutions that are very much, copied on the Western constitutions.
But
Um,
I know, but there's examples in China. Have you seen these when they're building a highway? It seems like they don't have eminent domain, and so a landowner can refuse to sell, and they'll build the freeway around him, and it creates some absurd situations. But
Yeah, but this requires maybe a separate discussion because remember, in China there is no private property officially, right? You don't have private property because it is officially a communist system, right?
okay,
When you buy a home or an apartment in China, you lease it for 99 years from the government. So you're not an
like in
owner in the
Britain,
same way as you're an owner in Europe. But
no,
that's
in
a separate
Britain it's the
discussion
same
about
thing.
China. It's relatively, no.
Britain has the same thing that you
You're
often the
right.
case
You're
is.
right. You're absolutely right. But of course, there has been traditionally maybe less protection of private property in China. But of course, China's revolution is much shorter, is much younger from compared to the glorious revolution of Britain, right? So that's why we still need to see to what extent the Chinese government is going to protect, de facto, not de jure, but de facto protect private property in China. Um, but you can see here also related to tax, right? The declaration also states that a general tax is indispensable, even though involuntary taxation is an obvious violation of property rights. As I said, it needs to be consensual. Otherwise, it is obviously, if you force someone to pay tax, it's obviously a violation of property. I wouldn't call it theft because you do get something for it, but it's not a free transaction, right?
What I'll point
Um,
out is when they wrote this, in the French Constitution, they had what were called passive citizens, which were non-property owners, and active citizens who owned property. And so it was the active citizens who decided taxation. And
right.
so you could see that, they kind of did consent to it. Um,
Well, not everybody signed this document, right?
Not
This
everybody,
document was
but as
signed
a
with just a
group.
couple of people.
Um,
That's where you get into this whole myth of the social contract. There is no such thing as a social contract.
no, I
It's just
agree. I
something,
agree.
a construction in order to try to get people to believe that they have actually, consented to some kind of contract, which they have never even been, shown, let alone signed, right?
Mhm.
Um, but and the same thing is we can go a little bit faster here, and I encourage people to read the article to get more details. But the same thing here is that the law has the right to forbid only those actions that are injurious to society. So again, we see that private property isn't inviolable and sacred or not, because in the next sentence they say that the law has a right to forbid, as long as it's if it is injurious to society. But who defines what is injurious to society? This is
The
something,
ruling
of course,
class.
that the state can arbitrarily decide at different periods, right? If we go to the Article 7, we have the same kind of thing. Uh, we have basically language that exposes the individual to state coercion and legal property rights violations. So, same thing with respect to freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is not guaranteed, contrary to what many people are saying now in France and in many other countries in the West. Freedom of speech is not guaranteed in this declaration. Because if you just read further, compared to this Article 10 that I mentioned earlier, it says, provided that the manifestation of these opinions does not trouble the public order established by law. And
I mean, does
I think
anyone
it's
really
pretty
believe
obvious,
there's
right?
freedom of speech in Europe? Does anyone believe that?
A lot of people believe that, and you know that
Then
very well because you
they're
live in
not well
Europe.
informed.
Many people
Well,
believe that there is freedom of speech in Europe, perhaps limited to the denial of the Holocaust, more or less. This is what most people believe.
they have explicit hate crime. You know, they have so many. No, I mean it's like obviously there's always some restrictions. Like in America, America has like robust freedom of speech from the government, from corporations. Corporations can squash your speech anytime they want, but from the government we do have robust protections in the U.S. But in Europe,
But
no.
even you see in the United States, you see how, to what extent freedom of speech is very often violated in the United States. You can see it with the social media platforms, where constantly the state is restricting speech. And
The,
so it happens a lot in the United States as well. And these things are never challenged, actually, very rarely challenged by the Supreme Court.
Well, that shows my point where the government and the big business they are all in bed together. You know, the government does call up Google or Facebook and say suppress this speech, but it's ultimately the private company that's suppressing it. They're getting a hint from the government that they should do it. That's for sure.
Of course.
Uh, but so um, you know, it goes both ways. That's why it's important. Like, you know, a document can't protect you. And especially if we only think of it as the government, we have to protect ourselves from corporations as well when they go awry.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that was it. I wanted to talk about this article. I hope it was interesting for our viewers. And thanks for the exchange, Kevin. And let's review more about property rights next time. Okay.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye bye.